Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Traceability Solution Providers in the Leather Supply Chain. Today's presentation will be recorded and sent out to all registered participants and also will be posted on the Hub. We will have a Q&A portion at the end of the presentation. You can type your questions into the question box on the webinar doc. Any unanswered questions will be answered afterward via email. Now on to Nicole with Textile Exchange. Nicole?
Thank you, Rose. Welcome, everybody. My name is Nicole Lambert, and it's really a great pleasure for me to welcome you on behalf of Textile Exchange and the Responsible Leather Roundtable to this third webinar of our learning series on traceability in the leather supply chain. So just before we start, I'd like to run you through our antitrust statement. So Textile Exchange convenes the textile community and values diversity of views, expertise, opinions, backgrounds, and experiences. It is expected that members of this community will collaborate by sharing ideas, information, and resources of publicly available information only, and avoid discussion on price, strategic plans, and other private and sensitive information. I'll also let you read through our disclaimer, but basically the views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this webinar belong solely to the speakers. And as the leader of the Responsible Leather Roundtable, Textile Exchange strives to maintain a neutral role. So just some quick house rules. You are all put on mute. And as Rose was mentioning earlier, this webinar is recorded and all the presentations and recordings will be shared on the Responsible Leather Roundtable, and the link is here. Later on, we will have a question and answer session. So please use the Q&A function that you will find in your Zoom toolbar. So as I was saying, this webinar is the third of a series of 5 focused on traceability in the leather supply chain. We had a first webinar on understanding traceability and the UNEC guidelines. Our last webinar, which was just 5 days ago, was focused on the traceability expectation of sustainability standards in the leather supply chain. So we had iCheck, the Leather Working Group, the Sustainable Leather Foundation, and Made in Green present the different traceability expectations and requirements of their standards, as well as the future expectations traceability would have in the standards. And today our webinar will be focused on supply chain mapping and traceability solution providers in the leather supply chain. Yeah, and so just before I hand over to our speakers today, I thought it'd be interesting to go through the definition of 3 terms that we have heard throughout our previous webinars on traceability, and that are commonly used when addressing the topic of traceability. And those terms are supply chain mapping, traceability, and transparency. So starting with supply chain mapping, this is kind of the discovery of one's supply chain, if we want to say. It is the exercise of identifying the different actors of each chair of your supply chain. And so mapping will be a very good way to support, for instance, a risk assessment, but also prioritize risk management actions accordingly. Traceability would qualify as the assurance, let's say. And according to ICIL, traceability is defined as the ability to verify the history, location, or application of an item by means of documented, recorded identification. So in other words, it is the tracking through a documented system of products and inputs from ideally the beginning of your supply chain all the way to the end product. And we've heard throughout the first and second webinars the many reasons why traceability is important. Amongst others, it is a way to manage your sustainability risks, but also quality issues in your supply chain. And it is also a way to back credible sustainability claims. Finally, we have transparency, which corresponds to disclosing information about one's supply chain to stakeholders. And a transparency strategy will be defined by what information your organization is willing to be transparent about, to whom you will be disclosing this information, and finally, how often this information will be shared and updated. And obviously the content shared will be completely embedded in the information and the data you have collected in the exercise of mapping your supply chain and through your traceability system. Throughout our previous webinars, we have heard the need and desire for more traceability, but also a clear demand from the end consumer and other stakeholders for more transparency. So as a leather supply chain supplier or a brand retailer, this can sound pretty daunting at first. But there are solution providers out there that can help you in this process. And today we will have 5 different organizations that will be providing you with an overview of supply chain mapping and traceability tools and services that can be applied to the leather supply chain and could potentially help your organization get started on a journey towards more transparency in your leather supply chain. So today we have with us Peter Hughes, who leads the development of Eurofins and the BLC sustainability services through expanding commercial opportunities, delivering specialist communication support to clients, and implementing traceability systems for the global supply chains. He is also involved with bespoke projects around circularity, research into emerging material innovation, and measuring the environmental impact of materials. Previously, Peter worked in the food industry, specializing in sustainability issues and supply chain mapping of the food to go sector, concentrating on improving environmental and ethical performance. We also have with us Paul Darras, who is the Innovation Project Manager at CTC. He is an engineer in computer vision and information technology and has been working for CTC since 2019, where his work focuses primarily on traceability in the leather industry. Prior, Paul worked for more than 10 years managing projects in a wide range of industries, including the medical, food, military, automobile, and logistic sectors. Tony Benson is the Managing Director of Applied DNA Science at Europe, with responsibility for business activity within Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Tony has been working with applied DNA science for just over 10 years. He has extensive experience in the risk and security sector, most of it spent in the cash handling and services industry. Traceability solutions in the fields of leather, fertilizer, down, and security are amongst the areas that Tony and his team lead on for applied DNA sciences. We have Toine de Vie with us, who is the Managing Director of Vitelco Leather. Toine is a Dutch farmer's son and has his background in agriculture and economics. Today, he is a board member and spokesman for the Pali Group and the managing director of their tannery, Vitelco Leather. Finally, we have with us Birgit Holgaard Langer, who is the business development director of the newly founded brand and business unit SPOOR, which is part of the Danish tannery Scanhide. She has a lot of experience in retail strategies, sales and commercial side of, and worked for the bestseller group, Veromoda, Lego, and Lamborghini. So very diverse and interesting panel with us today. And our agenda for today will be, we'll start with Peter, who will be presenting us with BLC's, Eurofin BLC's supply chain mapping tool. We will then pass on to Paul and Tony, who will be introducing us to 2 different traceability technologies applicable to the leather industry. Finally, Toine and Birgit will be giving us a perspective on how their companies that are manufacturing leather have managed to implement traceability down to farm level and what data this would allow you as a brand or retailer to have access to. And finally, we'll end this session with Q&A session. So stick around for the end. So without further ado, I am going to hand over to Peter. Peter, I'll let you unmute yourself.
Thanks, Nicole, and hello everyone on this webinar. Nice to talk to you. So yes, I'm going to be talking about exactly as Nicole's definition of supply chain mapping, which is really the identification of actors in a supply chain and how you can use a system such as this to develop an effective due diligence program and respond to challenges that appear in your supply chain. So if you can move to the next slide, please. Organizations are coming towards traceability from many different areas in the leather supply chain, particularly focused on situations like the deforestation challenge, animal welfare, particularly social compliance challenges. There are a range of environmental and social issues globally that are bringing people towards the issue of traceability. But we're also seeing other drivers increasingly becoming more important. For example, investors are asking questions around traceability. New legislation is coming out, particularly out of the EU and the UK shortly, regarding supporting brands to address challenges within their supply chain. Consumers and customers are also starting to ask more pertinent questions. And of course, we have programs such as Textile Exchange here, whereby certification programs are looking to expand traceability within their programs. So really, it's a really very hot topic at the moment. And supply chain mapping is a way that an organization can address these challenges and prove development along a traceability system. Next slide, please. In terms of leather, the leather industry, it's a global industry. The raw material for leather is obviously hides and skins from livestock. Every country in the world has a livestock industry. And so therefore, you have the potential for every country in the world to be the potential source of your leather. For leather, really, the big drivers, particularly in the bovine industry, are South America, North America, Australia. In the skins industry, you're looking at more at the Asia and Africa. But if you look at the global leather industry, material will travel around and be processed and part processed as it moves across the world. A good example is Italy. Italy has an established leather industry, but its livestock herd could only service about 10% of its total leather industry. So that means, by definition, more than 90% of Italian leather originates in its raw form outside of Italy. So that shows you the importance of undertaking a supply chain mapping exercise to understand really what your footprint looks like. Next slide, please. So the leather industry is multi-steps. There are multiple different manufacturing steps within it. Next slide, if you just click on, just pull up a little extra bit. So what we're saying is, as a brand and retailer, you're probably over on the right-hand side of this slide. You might understand where your leather traders or your finishing plants are. You may not know where those early processing plants are or where the slaughterhouses are, but using our supply chain mapping system, we can help you get that information. It's very challenging to get beyond the slaughterhouse into the farming system. This is because the livestock industry is a separate industry to the leather industry. The leather industry is a byproduct of the livestock industry. And therefore, understanding up into the farm scale is challenging. It is possible. We've achieved it in some cases, but really at this stage, identifying where the slaughterhouses are is a very good way of understanding the potential challenges of your leather supply chain. Next slide, please. So what we say, the best thing to do is to map it. Once you map it, you can know what your supply chain is and start to understand it and ultimately respond effectively. And that's why we feel that a supply chain mapping exercise is a really valuable exercise for any brand who wants to tackle traceability in a strategic way. Next slide, please. So the way our process works, it's a very collaborative process. We start by talking to a client to understand what are their drivers, what drivers are they are experiencing to bring them towards traceability, and we can help shape the project to meet the particular drivers that they're talking about, whether that be an environmental challenge, commercial issues around looking to rationalize their supply chain, maybe it's around quality, maybe it's around the social perspective. We can alter the project depending on what a client needs. We then build a questionnaire, and our questionnaire is our way of generating data. We use an online system, and the advantage of that is it can produce good qualitative and quantitative data. It also means that the information is uploaded immediately into our system, so we can see live as the data comes in, and we can help support a client to push parts of the supply chain that may be not engaging with the project as effectively, and we can do that in real terms. It also means that the data that we collect is of good quality because suppliers aren't asked lots of open questions. We ask our client to distribute the questionnaires themselves because they have the influence in their supply chain. We manage the responses, collect the data and collate it and review it. We then do our own validity checks on that. We check against, for example, leather working group status. We build a map. We do our risk assessment on top of that, and then present that information back to the client in the form of a story map, where we encourage the client to engage as many of their stakeholders in the process as possible. We feel this is an information share, and really the point is to share information. So it's important to get lots of different stakeholders on that call from the client to make most use of the project. It can take up to 6 months to do one of these effectively. It can be done quicker, but just to give you an idea, to do these properly, it can take some time to get that data. Okay, next slide, please. I'm just going to give you an indication now of a few screenshots from our system to give you an idea what it looks like. This is what a complete supply chain could look like. Tier 1s in red, so these are leather manufacturers. Tier 2s in blue, so these are potentially wet blue suppliers. And then Tier 3s, slaughterhouses in green. Just click on the next slide. To give you a more tuned in version of that, because it's a very busy slide, the other one. So this would be a brand located in the UK, sourcing from Europe and China. And after doing the exercise, you'd be able to identify that really the hotspots of sourcing are Brazil and Italy. And therefore, we would recommend that a supplier or a client who's gone through the process, who's identified this in their supply chain, they should focus on potentially the deforestation risk in Brazil as a result. Next slide, please. So we can highlight individual supply chains and take off the other ones. Next slide, please. We can do an assessment as to what kind of leather working group coverage you have in your supply chain and help you identify which suppliers who may be applicable to start going through the process to increase your leather working group footprint. Next slide, please. Deforestation, as I said, is a really important issue. And what we do is we've got deforestation data from the last 20 years in Brazil particularly. We're able to overlay that from the slaughterhouse information that we identify, and we can produce a risk assessment to identify which slaughterhouses in your supply chain are of greatest potential risk of sourcing from a deforested area. This allows you to then go and contact those slaughterhouses and ensure that those slaughterhouses have a policy and evidence that their policy is being adhered to ensure that material in your supply chain is not being sourced from a deforested area. Next slide, please. Just to give you an idea, we do lots of other data analysis, animal welfare, air pollution, drought, modern slavery. We can go down to really regional granularity. There's lots of different data sets that we can use to do a risk assessment on this piece of work. Next slide, please. We can even identify actually the satellite images of your suppliers. And this is an example of a feedlot supplier in a leather supply chain. So just to conclude, really, what we can give you is knowledge and understanding of your supply chain. We can help you understand what the sensitivities are within your supply chain. We collaborate with different industry groups and make sure those group requirements are adhered to. We give you an effective risk assessment and due diligence process that you can talk publicly about. We give you recommended actions of how you can respond to the information that we've produced. It allows for questions, a dialogue within your organization. It helps you talk to customers and consumers and provide an effective response to third parties. Okay, next slide. And just to conclude, really, it's important to look at supply chain mapping as a way of delivering on traceability. The way to think about it is we scope the project, build the questionnaire, generate the data, validate, risk assess, and then produce a presentation of results. And from this basis, you can then start to respond to traceability questions. Okay, very quick presentation there. So I'll move on to Paul.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. I know that 8 minutes is short. So yeah, Paul, if you can take over, that would be great. Thanks.
Okay, so hello everyone. I'm Paul Darras, Innovation Project Manager at CTC, and I will present the CTC approach for the traceability in the leather supply chain. Next slide, please. So who are we? CTC is a unique innovation hub dedicated to the leather goods, footwear, apparel industries. And we work on a very wide range from research and development, training, consultancy, audits, chemical and physical testing laboratories. And about traceability, we work for around 10 years on this topic. Next slide, please. So why do we want traceability? We have the same goal, but for different reasons. Some for responsible business, to answer to the illegal logging problem, the animal welfare, the working conditions, or the environmental protection. Some want to improve their process for quality, for control, and some want to improve the quality of the skin or the hide. And this was the main focus of CTC at first. We wanted to map the origin of the defect, then plan some action to reduce the defect due to the living conditions, slaughter or flame condition, preservation, and so on. So for this, we need a unitary traceability. Next slide, please. We developed a high-power CO2 laser marking system. So we engrave a unique code to the core of the hide through the air. Then we have a unitary traceability with a unique ID per hide, which resists to all the tanning processes. Next slide, please. So we first developed a solution in our lab, then we work to implement it in our industry. So our solution is based on the meat traceability with the ear tag. Then we introduce a paper label to keep the data during the flaying process. So we scan the ear tag and we print immediately a paper label which is fixed to the hide or to the skin. Then we mark each hide with a laser in a salting workshop or beam house. And we also develop a reading system of this mark. So we can read automatically those ID and send them in an information system. So now I will going to show you how it looks like in production. So next slide, please. Thank you. Here is a paper labeling. The paper labeling is necessary during the flaying process because we cannot introduce a laser in this step. But we need to conserve the traceability from the living animal. So there we have some sample of the paper label. Next slide, please. Then here we have a short video for the laser marking system. And as we can see, the front guy will scan the paper label, which automatically sends the data to the laser marking system. And during it check the defect on the hide, the previous hide on the conveyor will be marked. The global process of marking is around 1.2 seconds, and it is done on the flow, on the process. So next slide, please. Here we have some sample of laser marking with the unique ID. So as a summary, the laser system is the tools which we can go from the paper label to the marking on the hide. Next slide, please. On this slide, we can see the evolution of the marked on the hide. So we have the fresh marked on the salt hide on skins. And as we can see on the unearthed step, on the wet blue step, and also on semi-finished leather, we can still see the marked. Also in finished leather, but only with light finishing. Next slide, please. Here we have a short video also for the automatic reading system. Here we have the hide on the conveyor belt, and during the sorting process, we scan the hide and detect the unique ID on it with deep learning algorithm. And the process takes less than 1 second. And we have some sample of marking in wet blue. Next slide, please. We also developed an automatic reading system for reading on laser stack on a pallet with a matrix camera. We have this is for people who doesn't have any conveyor belt, and we have the same result on both systems, which are around 90% of success of good reading. Next slide, please. The last part of the traceability solution is the database. CTC does not provide this, but we are aware that this is an important topic. And we think that a common database could be very interesting to share some data, at least the basic ones, the 5W, where, when, who, why, and what. If you want to share all this information, we need to work on a common data model or on a communication standard. And this is why CTC work also with the UN CEFACT on this standard. So the goal is really to speak the same language about the traceability in all the laser value chain. Next slide, please. So CTC firstly focus on the French industry, especially on the calf skin. And about the deployment, we have already many paper label in slaughterhouses on eye traders. And we also have a laser in 4 big slaughterhouses and in 3 tanneries, and 2 more ongoing at the end of the year. So that will be around 10 laser in production. We also have 3 reading systems in tanneries and 3 more ongoing at the end of the year. And we have some close contact with manufacturers. So CTC almost cover the French calf laser production, and we will now focus on the global bovine industry and not only the French one. And for some teasing, we also start to work on sheepskins. So next slide, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Paul. That was really interesting. And I'm sure we'll be having questions. So now I'll just hand this over to Tony. I'll let you unmute yourself.
Nicole, thank you. And thank you to everyone for joining us this afternoon or whatever time it is, wherever you are. And I hope you enjoy the next 8 minutes. Next slide, please. So a brief introduction to Applied DNA Sciences, who are based in Stony Brook, which is just outside New York in the US. We have a global presence. I, for example, are based in the UK. We have operations in India and many other countries. At the bottom of the slide, you'll see the text which says we're the world's largest PCR, which is polymerized chain reaction based mass producer of DNA, which does set us apart from our competitors. In fact, the DNA we manufacture, which is synthetic DNA, is clinically pure. In fact, at the beginning of last year, when COVID came to us, we started manufacturing COVID test kits and also vaccines for animals. So we have a lot of scientists working in our team. Next slide, please.
Sorry. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that.
Thank you. So these are just some examples. I'll not go through every one, but these are some examples of the technology we're currently using out there, where we're actually DNA tagging a variety of product. So we do a lot for Department of Defense at the top left-hand side of your slide. Textiles, fertilizer often surprises people. We actually put a DNA coating on granular fertilizer, which allows you to trace it throughout the supply chain. And as many of you may know, fertilizer is not expensive, and in many instances, neither is our technology. Pharmaceuticals, we put it on the coating of tablets and such. We enjoy working in cannabis and all sorts of different things, including feathers and down. And our technology is so good that we actually convict many criminals, as you'll see at the bottom of the slide. To date and counting, we've convicted 147 criminals, and they've enjoyed prison sentences of over 720 years. Next slide, please. So our platform is actually called Certainty because we give certainty to people in supply chains. And it has 3 main component parts, which are shown at the bottom left. So we tag a product with our DNA. We then test it as it goes through the supply chain, which enables us to track it and give you traceability. Next slide, please. So what is signature DNA tag? What is it? How do we make it? So I'll try to describe it briefly. So first of all, when we design the DNA tag, we first of all understand what you're going to use it for, what temperatures is it going to need to resist, etc. And then we assign a molecular tag, which will be a unique DNA tag for you or your customer or whatever. There's no end to the number of DNA tags we can manufacture, the differences. We then formulate that with the carrier, so because we need a carrier to put the DNA into to put it onto the product, be it leather or fertilizer or feathers or whatever. And I'll also say that the DNA, the best way of describing it is probably it's similar to a barcode, which carries a lot of information. It's synthetic, it's non-GMO, and it can be manufactured at a very large scale. Next slide, please. So leather traceability for leather, how does it actually work? So put simply, there's 4 key steps. So if you want to use a unique DNA tag for a tannery, we can design the DNA tag that can be allocated to a tannery, or a DNA tag that can be allocated to a brand, for example. So the second thing is we then add the DNA tag into the finish. So if that's a PU finish or perhaps an oil or whatever, we actually add the DNA into the liquid, which is then used in the finish. And I've used the example of a shoe here. It could be anything, any leather product. So the shoe is then manufactured using the tagged leather. And then finally, just by using a swab and running the swab over the shoe, it then picks up the DNA very easily. You don't have to use anything. It's not invasive, doesn't have any impact on the product. And we can pick up and read the DNA using some portable test equipment, which is available to clients. Next slide, please. So just to recap on that, so we tag the finished leather at the finishing tannery, which is added into the PU finish, typically when it's been sprayed onto the leather. And the important thing here is that we're not changing any processes in the finishing tannery. It's just the same. I guess the only difference is that we add the DNA into, for example, the PU finish, which is very easy to do. Next slide, please. And then, of course, as part of the quality control in the tannery, they test to ensure that the DNA is actually present before they ship the leather out to the finishers, sorry, to the manufacturing plant for, say, shoes or whatever the product is. Next slide, please. And then, of course, as that leather is received, for example, the shoe manufacturer, they can also then do a test using the portable test equipment to confirm that the correct DNA code has been received and the correct leather before it's actually manufactured into shoes. Next slide, please. And then finally, the brands can also do their own testing, perhaps in the distribution chain, or indeed at the retail outlets, and they can then provide full traceability from the tannery to the retail outlet. Next slide, please. Now, we have a video here. I'm not going to show it today because we've only 8 minutes, but it's here so that this will be on the website, which Nicole mentioned, and you can have a look at that. But it shows you actually how a DNA test is carried out. And it's very, very simple, as you will see. And the portable test equipment, by the way, is very small. It's about 160 millimeters tall and about 120 millimeters in diameter, which you just plug into your laptop. Next slide, please. The investment costs for people are pretty straightforward. So the portable testing equipment is $9,500, which includes a starter kit for 40 reagents to do 40 tests. And the reagents are basically a lock and key. So it's very secure. Someone else cannot read your DNA code, essentially. And the reagents themselves cost $10 per test. And the cost of the DNA, obviously that's subject to volume, but I can tell you it is very, very affordable and is commercially viable. Next slide, please. So we're already DNA tagging leather. We've been doing this for over 12 months now. And we've actually recovered DNA from shoes over a period of 12 months since it was actually tagged. So if you're interested, please let us know, and we'd be delighted to discuss with you. Next slide, please. So for me, from the, I've probably got just over 3-4 years experience of working in the leather industry now, so I'm pretty new, but it does strike me that if we listen to what Paul's presentation gave, which is essentially laser etching using the data from the ear tag, if you add the DNA tagging of the hide during the finishing process at the finishing tannery, combine the two, and it really does give you end-to-end traceability. Next slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tony. And yeah, great to see how these different technologies can interact together. So very interesting there. So now we'll head on to the leather manufacturers that have implemented traceability solutions in their supply chains. And we'll start off with Tuan at Vitelco Leather. Tuan, I'll let you unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, like said, my name is Tuan de Bie, Managing Director of Vitelco Leather. Yeah, you can go to the next slide, please. First, I'd like to thank Textile Exchange for inviting us to give this presentation today. We at Vitelco Leather think traceability will be one of the key factors in improving the sustainability of the leather industry to the world and to make it even more sustainable. So I'm honored to have the opportunity to tell you how we implement it. Next slide, please. Vitelco Leather is a member of Pali Group, a Dutch family business and one of the largest veal producers in Europe. And a very important part of our strategy is our fully integrated chain. And later on in my presentation, you will see that this is an important reason why guaranteeing high quality and traceability is relatively simple for us. Yes, next slide, please. In this integrated supply chain, we start with buying the calves straight from the dairy farms where they are born when they are about 2 weeks old. From here, these calves go to our contracted veal farms where we determine exactly how they are raised. On these farms, the calves are assessed by one of our own specialists every week. After about 6 to 8 months, they go to our own slaughterhouse and deboning facility, mostly also with our own transport. So basically, we know everything about the animals' lives and it is all documented. And a little over 7 years ago, we were able to add a tannery to this integrated chain. And this was a great opportunity for us to take another step in this integrated chain and to add extra value to the skins also. Yes, next slide, please. Another big advantage is that this integrated chain is fully checked and controlled by an independent authority named SKV. And this goes for every calf in the Netherlands. It is impossible to slaughter a calf in our slaughterhouse unless it is checked and certified by SKV. And for example, they check the use of antibiotics and the use of growth hormones, which are forbidden in the Netherlands, by the way. And they do this by taking urine and hair samples unannounced on the farms. But they also check things like light and air in a barn, the size of the housing, farm hygienics, veterinarian care, water quality, and animal welfare. And all this was already in place in the Netherlands, and we can already, for a long time, guarantee that every single of our calf skins comes from this controlled supply chain. But we still developed individual traceability. And we did this for 2 reasons. The next slide, please. One is to give full transparency, or as I heard today, full disclosure for our customer. So they have at every moment 100% proof of sustainability and durability. And of course, our customer can use this further in the supply chain if preferred. I don't have to explain to you why this is important. I think in the other presentations and also in the previous webinars, this was outlined more than enough. And the second reason for this traceability for us is to improve quality. Of course, during the production process, all the way up to finished leather, we will add all kinds of data to every individual hide. And based on this data, we can provide feedback backwards into the supply chain. So, for example, to the slaughterhouse and to transport, but also to the farm. And as you probably know, in finished leather, you will see things you cannot see earlier in the process. And with this traceability, we can go back into the supply chain to address any issue. A farmer even knows in what stall the animals have been, so we could even find a loose screw in a barn by this. This way, it becomes relatively easy to improve specific things on a farm that affect the hide quality. And it will even give us the possibility to, in the future, reward the farmer extra for better hides. Or we could reward the farmer for other things like better welfare or a smaller carbon footprint. And it gives us the opportunity to reward the farmer directly for doing the right things instead of through a credit or a book and claim system. Next slide, please. For this traceability, we developed also a laser marking system. Today, the hides get a RFID label in our slaughterhouse, and the laser marking is applied after selection in the fresh hide. This system makes it possible to use it also for smaller slaughterhouses in the future, because you don't need a laser marking system at every location. If the hides have the right RFID label, you can apply the marking after collecting the hides. And as you can see on the slide, we developed this with a whole code because we wanted to make sure they are electronically readable everywhere in the process, all the way to the end in the finished leather, no matter what color. Yes, next slide, please. Of course, in a slaughterhouse, this code is automatically connected to the ear tag of the animal, what makes all the data available. And after tanning, we read the code with a special camera. But as shown on this slide, the good codes are even readable with a free iPhone app. Yes, next slide, please. And as we say, if you know the calf, you know everything. There is a free, in the Netherlands, there is a free government-owned app available to get all this information. Every bovine is registered in Europe, and this is open source data, so available to everyone. And with just the ear tag number of the calf, of a calf, you can get all this information, as you can see on the screen. It says where and when it was born, on what farm it has been, where it was slaughtered, the sex, hair color, it's all there. Even the ear tag number of the mother. Yes, next slide, please. And it will even show you on Google Maps where the calf was born and raised. And like I said in the beginning, this makes it a lot easier and fully reliable to provide this information. And in our integrated chain, we of course add all kinds of information to this data, like for example, quality info and things like yield and thickness of the hide, but also in what truck we transported the calf and what they were fed. Yes, next slide, please. To finish this up, a small update on our planning. We just started marking and delivering traceable hides, and we do this under the Reveal label. And while we apply this system in our own company, we will fine-tune the technique for marking, and in the same time, we will implement the system for electronic reading of the codes in the production process. When all is optimized, we will also be supplying this complete traceability system to interested third parties. Next slide, please. And then with this next slide, I would like to thank everyone for listening and being here. And of course, I'll be more than happy to answer all your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Toine. That was great. And I see questions already coming in the Q&A. So don't hesitate. You can already set your questions in if you like, and we'll go through them afterwards. And now we're already up to our last presentation. And so Brigitte, I'll let you unmute yourself and take over.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Hi, everybody. My name is Brigitte, and I'm representing the Danish company Scanhide, where we last year created the separate business unit and brand called SPOOR, which actually means tracking the marks left by wild animal. So we want to connect the animal and also provide data for brands who work with leather in order for them to use the data in their communication and in their branding, and also knowing everything about their raw material. So as said here, we are all about co-creating with brands, and we are having or working with hides from Scandinavia and Germany, and we hold all data on these animals. We work with the bovine leather, all types of qualities, and we provide leathers for the automotive industry, the fashion and lifestyle industry. So with the full traceability, we connect with brands who are interested in working with traceable hides and leather, and together we co-create the value together. So we deliver the wet white or wet blue, fully traceable. And together with finishing tanneries, we make sure that we can use the full traceability in the supply chain. Roughly on a yearly basis, we process 1.1 million hides from Scandinavia and Germany. Next slide, please. So we already touched upon the importance of having traceability in the leather industry, and the increased demands coming from the end consumers is definitely our approach. So we very much focus on the outside-in perspective in the business model and in the way we are doing collaborations with brands to make sure that the data that we hold can be used towards end consumers, where you don't need a degree in farming systems or in the leather industry to understand what this actually gives. So we want to empower brands and enrich them with our data, so the brands go from knowing something or believing something. So we want to make sure that the data actually gives the guarantee for knowing exactly what you're working with. The way we are doing it is that we collaborate with brands directly. They go to their normal suppliers, and through their normal suppliers, they create the pull after our raw material, either wet blue or wet white, fully traceable. So the model is that you collaborate through the existing suppliers that you normally work with already today. So in very short, I have a very short film that I would like to show you here. And Nicole, if you could add the sound, please. Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Which farm the cow comes from, where it was born, where it grew up. However, the number also tells about our animal welfare. When seeing cows grazing in the meadow, very few people think of quality design, but Scandinavian hides are in fact among the best in the global market, exactly because of our animal welfare, climate and sustainability approach to farming. The number is a new technology. Other things remain unchanged. The craftsmanship, the passion, the dedication. Human hands have touched every single hide at Scanhide. We assess the hide by sensing, stretching and feeling the material. Only this way can we guarantee our customers the best pieces of leather. Last but not least, the number tells something about the future. The hides we tan today may still be found on designer shoes, car seats or furniture classics for decades or maybe even generations from now on. because as opposed to other materials, leather lasts for a long time. By then, we will still be able to identify the cow whose hide was used for a specific product. Each hide tells a unique story. At ScanHide, we tell every single one of them.
Yeah, thank you very much. Next slide, please. So we are a cooperative, which means that we are owned by farmers, and therefore animal welfare is of course a very important part of our identity. So in terms of animal welfare, next slide please, we actually had a recent report from BBV, where you can see that Danish crown, where we get primarily all our Danish hides from, is categorized in tier 2 in terms of animal welfare standards. So BBV, for those of you who don't know, this report is the leading global measure of company performance on farm animal welfare. So of course, animal welfare is very important. And when we talk to brands, this is definitely also one of the questions from a customer service perspective that many brands face. Did these animals have a nice life? And through data, we are able to provide data on this. Next slide, please. So craftsmanship is, of course, also a very important part. ScanHide has existed for 30 years this summer, and we've been selling hides into the leather industry for all of those years. And with SPOOR, we now have a possibility to collaborate directly with brands and convey the data in a way where they can actively use it together with our raw material. Next slide, please. From a traceability point of view, this of course enables the brands to use all the data. So the way it works is that we have all data from the EarTag system. So we hold all data, also the shift of hands, if they've been shifting hands from farm level. And we then provide all the leathers with a unique number that is laser printed into the hide, which can be used for a final product as well. Next slide, please. From a sustainable and a climate point of view, we hold from this summer 21 from Danish hide, Danish crown. We hold also the LCA calculations on farm level, which will be hugely interesting, which means that we have the LCA calculation on hide level on our Danish raw material. Next slide, please. So collaboration is definitely the key word in the way we operate and we collaborate with brands. For us, it's very important to involve different stakeholders in the industry, which is also the reason why we have joined a partnership with Oekotex in order to become a part of their leather certification and Made in Green, where end consumers are able to see the full journey from farm level until finished product. Besides that, we are also collaborating with design schools in order to make sure that we provide insight for the designers of tomorrow, to make sure that they understand what animal welfare is and how it works with our traceability system. The last slide I've brought today is a case with the first collaboration we did with a Danish shoe brand called Rockamore. They launched a collection with QR codes in the shoes, where you were able to join the full journey from field to end product. And here we also used blockchain technology in order to provide all data from all suppliers and sub-suppliers in the value chain. So we started out on the field and we took the customers all the way to the finished product. And we will be launching a collection again, the third actually in the autumn season. So the last slide. Thank you so much for your attention and your time, and hope to connect with you.
Thank you so much, Birgit. That was really great. And thank you to all our speakers today. It was very interesting, and I think it's just great to see how many new possibilities there are out there. So, and how many connections can be made also between these different technologies. So we still have a few minutes left, and so I'll go through a few of the questions that we've received. So I'll just go through these by order, kind of, and call out the different speakers. So Tony, this first one is for you. Which textiles does applied DNA traces apply to, can be used for, I guess?
Thank you, Nicole. Yes. So I guess the main textile that we've been doing for many years now, gosh, must be at least 8 years, possibly 10, is cotton. I think we're reasonably well known for that, but we also do feathers, down, wool, viscose, polyurethanes, polyesters, I should say, pretty much everything that you can throw at us, I guess. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Then I've got another one. Charlie Fay, can you just indicate what equipment you're referring to? So you're asking the output of the equipment. I'll just let you add some information on that. We've got one on up to which level of traceability details are you able to disclose for the end customers as convenient to all supply chain operators? And I guess that question could probably be asked to all of you. So maybe I'll, should we start with, well, hang on, shall we start with Brigitte, maybe? You can go first.
Yeah, I mean, from a traceability point of view, we of course hold, as I said, all the information about when the calf was born, the farmers, the shift of hands, the abattoir it went to, and also, of course, everything related to the tanning process at Scanhide. But besides that, we also hold data on animal welfare from different rating systems. We hold data from a climate point of view. So we have different kind of data we're able to enrich into the system.
Thank you. Maybe I can move on to Paul, and maybe could you give some information on, yeah, the level of traceability details of the data that could be embedded in the CTC technology in the database you're thinking about building?
We can have all kind of information from different partner for the value chain. It depends on me who want to share what of the information.
Back to transparency.
Exactly. Yeah, back to transparency.
Great, thanks. Tony, do you want to add on to that as well, maybe?
Yes, thank you. And perhaps I didn't explain this so well in my presentation, but you may recall that I mentioned there were 3 component parts, which is tagging something, testing it, and then tracking. So once we've tagged something, obviously the DNA is there. And when you test it, you can read the DNA code, the unique code. Now, the test equipment that we have, the portable test equipment, each piece of equipment is unique. And we check the where the equipment is geographically. And so we know where the test has been carried out. And so we're putting together all this data. So we know where the, in this example with leather, we know that the leather has been tagged at a certain finishing tannery. And because it's been tested throughout the supply chain, then we know that that leather has gone to a particular manufacturer. And then we know it's gone to perhaps a distributor. And then if you test it in the store, for example, a retail store, we know, so we can give you all that data. And one of the things we do is we put all that data together for our clients, and we can do that to link in with an ERP system or a blockchain system or whatever the client wants. And we do that for clients already.
Thank you, Tony, for that. And maybe I'll just we can just finish with Tuan. You touched a bit on the type of information that you're currently gathering through your traceability system, but you might want to just repeat that quickly before we close.
Yeah, I will try not to repeat it exactly, but I think the level of traceability details that we can deliver depend, if you look at it not from our own perspective singly, but all over the world, it depends a lot on how well the animals are registered. I think that's a very important start if you want to say something about things like animal welfare and where animals were born and all of those kinds of things, deforestation. It's important to know the animal. For us, of course, in Europe, it's a big advantage that it's already in place, but that's a very important part of it. I think after that, you can add all the kinds of information you want. And for us specifically, because we have this integrated chain, we know everything about these animals. We even know from a single animal if it had some antibiotics and when and what. So we know everything, what they were fed and what truck they have been. And then if you want to disclose this for the end consumers, I think once you have the hard part is to keep all this information and this traceability with the hide throughout the process of slaughter, tanning, finishing, all those kinds of things. Once you have finished leather, it is relatively easy to apply something to keep all this information available. And Tony presented one of the possibilities, but I think there might be a few more. So I think if you want, like Paul said, if you want the information and it's there, we should be able to disclose it as long as we can manage traceability up to the finished leather.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you to all our speakers today. It was fantastic. And thank you to everyone that participated in this webinar. As I was saying at the beginning, the recording and the presentations will be available on our website, and you'll be getting some communications about that. And we look forward to seeing everyone again on June the 1st for our 4th webinar, which is a joint webinar with NWF and GRSB. So thank you, everyone, and I wish you all a wonderful rest of your day.
Again, thank you to our speakers and thank you for participating in today's webinar. As a friendly reminder, as mentioned, all unanswered questions will be answered via email, and an email will be sent to all registered participants with a link to today's presentation. That concludes our webinar. Thank you. Goodbye.